Welcome to the Behavioral Groups Podcast. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We interview interesting people in order to unlock insights into behavioral science and how we can apply those observations to work and life.
And today we have a favor to ask of you, our listeners. We want to expand the reach of this podcast and help bring insights into behavioral science to more and more people. One way that you can help is to write us a review or to give us a good rating on your podcast service. We would greatly appreciate you taking a few minutes of time and go ahead and do that. And you know what? You can pause this right now and go do it now. So go ahead. We'll wait. Really.
Are you done yet?
And you coming back? All right. There you go.
You're back yet? Okay, good. Well, in this episode, it shouldn't even take 2 minutes. This should be fast. Okay, but in this episode, we talked to April Seifert, founding partner of Sprocket, and also the host of a fantastic podcast called Women Inspired. Our conversation started by talking with her about gender stereotypes and how stereotypes in general have a bad rap.
Yeah, and they're really just cognitive shortcuts that our brains make.
But we are so much more than our stereotypes, and we also talked about that and how we can adjust those stereotypes.
Yeah, we talked about how we adjust through either cognitive dissonance, such as finding out that April is a skydiver as well as a mom.
So she has different identities.
Or by purposely being more aware of our stereotypes and thoughtful and intentional in how we approach these sometimes tricky and subconscious aspects of our being. April expanded on her thoughts on implicit bias assessments and implicit bias training. And we also talked a bit about one of my favorite topics, self-identity.
Yeah, you identify with yourself a lot, don't you?
Yes.
A lot.
My self-identity is very strong, yes.
Well, the conversation also veered off to talk about what April is currently working on. It's a cool project called the Peak Mind Psychology Project, and it's very good stuff.
Yeah,
so
check it out.
We got to urge you to check it out. We talked about books that have influenced her career course, and of course, we actually talked about her favorite music.
We did, didn't we?
That?
Yeah, and I love the part where she talked about how she uses music to prime her activities. So she uses music to set the mood for what she's trying to do.
Which is totally right up your alley.
It is totally up my alley. All right.
Mr. Playlist.
So sit back, grab a drink, and listen to our conversation with April Seifert.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
It's good to have you here in our fabulous studios.
I love it. I love it.
Kurt always likes to sort of berate the space that it's just his dining room, but I love this dining room. I think it's a great dining room.
It is until you have to clean it up afterwards, and there you go. So
there you go. Okay, so we're going to start with a speed round.
Love it.
You ready?
Bring it on.
Okay, up the mountain or down the mountain?
Up the mountain.
Old house or new house?
Old house.
Yeah. Monet versus Michelangelo.
I'm going to go nudity. I'm going to go Michelangelo.
There you go. There you go.
There you go.
We might have to dig in on that one. Paper, rock, scissors.
Scissors.
Which scissors? Okay, there you go.
All right. Okay.
Why
good.
scissors?
I feel like it's really utilitarian.
Yeah?
I just am at heart. I just like things to do something for me. And
so
yeah,
this
scissors.
isn't about winning the paper, rock, scissors thing because...
No, I'm like, which one of those? Like, if I had to take one of those to a desert island is literally where my mind went. I'm like, I want the scissors. I can find a rock, and the heck am I going to do with paper? But I want the scissors.
Oh, there you go. If you're going to a desert island, paper for the glass bottle so you can write your note.
Dude. Yeah.
All right. With that, let's move on.
So, okay. A social cognitive psychologist.
Yes.
For those who aren't familiar with social cognitive psychology, can we just start with a little explanation?
Yeah, let's start on the back end and then move forward because that's easier. Psychology, people know, and if you're listening to this podcast, I hope you know what that is. Cognition and cognitive psychology specifically deals with how people encode and organize and retrieve information cognitively. And this can be information about almost anything. And that brings us to that first word, social. I'm really interested in how we encode and organize and retrieve and use information about people, whether that is individual people, the social setting they're in, social groups that they might be a part of, or all of those factors interplaying together. That's the type of thing that I really love to study. So how do we interact with each other from the perspective of how does all of that information get sort of, organized in our mind.
I also know you're kind of a data geek. So
yeah,
actually not maybe, but you're a data geek. So how does that work with the social side and the cognitive side? Because that's very behavioral.
It is, yeah. I like to tell people that I am multi-passionate. I just really, it's a nice way of saying I do a lot of stuff and sometimes it doesn't join completely. But no, I really I just have a lot of loves, and I love data and data analysis. I love the power that, it can bring to organizations and to help solve problems. And two, when you go through, social cognitive psychology is an experimental form of psychology, meaning not clinical, not counseling. I don't see patients. It's not that type of venue. I do research and I analyze data. And so that's really, it all began in the same place, but then the social cognitive psych went a much more applied route, and the data science went a much more databasey machine sort of route, just organically.
So give us an example of how you might apply this kind of encoding the way our mind is remembering and recording stuff in a corporate setting. In a corporate setting,
wow.
Or not.
Really, so in a corporate setting, the same sorts of rules apply as anywhere else. You are still in a situation where it is people interacting with other people.
Yep.
And all of those same types of social cues that help. We were talking right before we started recording about priming and bringing up some of those associations, those cognitive associations that we have. All of that still applies in a corporate setting. So, for example, we have, the work that I did, especially for my dissertation, focused on gender stereotyping. And that sounds so negative. And when we talk to people in sort of like lay conversations, they think stereotypes, this is so terrible.
Yes.
Really, from a social cognitive psychology perspective, they're not necessarily positive or negative things. They're just your brain doing its job and making connections between information that it sees that repetitively happen together.
But we have linked stereotypes with bad.
Yes.
Not even good. It's rare that we think about good stereotypes but typically we think of bad.
It's that labeling of the word itself has that negative connotation.
Correct.
So
okay, but back to your we'll come back to that in a second. Back to your dissertation about these gender stereotypes.
Yeah, so really stereotypes are just cognitive associations that we formed over time. They just happen to deal with people as the concept that we're looking at. So in terms of gender, we all have stereotypes or cognitive associations about men and about women. And these associations, will take women because that's what I focused a lot of my research on. Women are seen as very nurturing and very maternal and very nice and communal. We are not seen as strong and dominant and driven and mathematically inclined and other things. Right. And so if you think about that in the context of your question, in a corporate setting, seeing somebody's gender, seeing somebody and realizing that they are a man or a woman can prime these cognitive associations, and that can lead you to be more likely to, it's not a given, more likely to behave toward that person in a way that conforms to those stereotypes. So you expect that person to live up to the stereotype that you have about their social group.
Will that also then influence what we're taking in and how we're encoding the information that we get?
Hugely.
Yeah, so that if my stereotype is informed in a particular way, I'll have that confirmation bias going all day that is primarily seeing and encoding and recording the things that conform with my view, my stereotype, right?
Totally. A stereotype is something that operates very much, we're getting a little bit away from it, but like a belief. And so confirmation bias does color all of that. It's that filter that it's just a natural thing. 100% of people have this. Women have this about women. Because we all grew up in this society where we got the same information.
There was a research study, and I can't remember who did it or when. And so if you know about this and I'm misquoting this or doing this, please correct me, that looked at, again, the stereotype about women and math is hard, right, for women. And yet there's another stereotype about Asian ethnicity and being smart in math. And so when they primed women, Asian women, with their with a gender perspective, they performed worse on math tests.
Yes.
When they primed them with their Asian ancestry, they actually performed better on math. Is that sounding like something you've seen or heard?
Exactly in line with exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating component because, as we were talking earlier before the show, that priming component should actually, if we think about this rationally, why would that have any impact on how we behave?
But it's so powerful.
It really does, because of the cognitive ways that our brain process the information. So
yes, absolutely. And I love the example you gave, because there are practical ways, for the audience listening to this, to think about how that same person, an Asian American woman, might feel more Asian or feel more female depending upon the context that she's in. So I work in data science largely. Do you know how many times I walk into a room and I'm the only woman there? I feel really female. Now, I'm more used to it. I'm more used to being sort of a, minority gender in that context. But it happens similarly where whatever you happen to be, whatever social groups you're a part of, whether it's ethnicity or gender, you walk into a room where you're the only one of that, you're going to feel that part of your identity a lot more. That's going to prime all of this stuff a lot more. So that's where, we get into discussions about why is it so important to have a balanced, representation of people. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. It really is, because it starts to prime some of these aspects and influence behavior largely without us even realizing it.
Cialdini talks about how when you're in your hometown, you're going to be aware of all the differences that you have with everybody in your hometown. The people that you agree with politically or disagree with politically, you're gonna see yourself in a particular gender role and a particular role within the community. But if you go to Europe, if you're an American and you go to Europe and you're wandering around Paris and someone makes a comment about an American, it's like, hey, that's me.
Yeah.
And yet we're not framing ourselves. We're not thinking about ourselves as an American when we're wandering on our hometown. But man, take us out of that context and put us in a world where we are deeply the minority.
Yes.
Then it gets back to deeper roots.
Yeah.
And I was surprised that he used. I mean, when I think about gender identity, would be super powerful, right? That would seem to be stronger than just than national identity.
Yeah, I mean, there's whole books. I mean, we're all from different planets, right? Mars and Venus and all the things. I mean, gender is a really important part of our identity, and it can be that maybe you identify with the core pieces that are stereotype congruent, and maybe it is that you vehemently do not identify with those pieces, but either of those can become really important to who you are and who you see yourself as.
So help me explain that a little bit more when you don't conform to those preconceived notions. Help me understand. I mean, so there are certain individuals, if I don't view myself as a bald, middle-aged man, I view myself as a 20-something. How does that work?
With long flowing hair
in my dreams that I have to constantly
be flipping
my head
in
back
my
and forth.
Yeah, I get it. Well, one conversation that we had recently was around. At the time of recording this, I am extremely pregnant. And that is a really big visual cue to people that, this woman not only is a woman, obviously, but she is a mom type woman. She's making a child currently. Maybe she has another child. And that's a really big cue that, she's a really maternal, soft, loving, nurturing person, which I like to think that I'm that person at times.
But it doesn't define you all the time.
No. And so I'm not the type of person, people's mind doesn't It doesn't immediately go to, she must have spent 90% of the last, hours of her waking hours of her week coding. That must have been what she was doing this week. I'm really excited to be here because I'm not coding right now because I did a lot this week. It's fun, but there's a limit. But they don't immediately go to, she codes. She must be a power lifter. She must be a skydiver. She must like adventure sports. No one thinks about that. And those are very important parts of my identity, but they're not cued by this big basketball I'm carrying around under my shirt.
But if you came in and you were wearing a skydiving outfit or in that kind of component, does that then, so those outward cues are what people associate with that identification? Is that how that works?
I feel like I paid you $50 to ask me that question.
I'll collect later.
It's a great question because there's this notion in stereotyping literature that gets at two cognitive tricks that people use when they encounter counter-stereotypical people.
Okay.
So, and this is really what my dissertation was about. It was so fun.
Can't wait. This is we're getting to the highlight of the entire podcast.
Someone might download it. I think maybe a dozen people have, and my mom might have done it 6 times.
We'll put the link
on. There you go.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
So,
what are the 2 tips?
So people use these 2 cognitive tricks. So they might see a woman, in the way that I talked about myself as a skydiving person or whatever. Another example might be a lesbian woman. Another example might be someone who's really, really sexy with really provocative clothing, or a woman who is a leader in her organization. If we take that totally out of context and put it on a different social group, we think about African American people, and Barack Obama is a great example that is counter-stereotypical to the stereotype most people grow up to have about African American people. Now, there's 2 ways that people sort of reconcile that, because there's some dissonance there, right? Like, no, April's got a belly. She's supposed to be a mom and really communal and nurturing and whatever. I don't know what to do with that skydive and powerlifting thing. You can subgroup, meaning you recognize the fact that there is something counter-stereotypical and you adjust your stereotype, your cognitive stereotype, to now include this new information. Now, you can imagine how that is a little bit cognitively risky, because the more people you encounter who are counter-stereotypical, like, your stereotype goes out the window and it doesn't work for you anymore. It's no longer a heuristic shortcut.
Which is problematic because we rely on those heuristics.
It is. We do. So the second trick that people use, and they kind of waffle between them, and there's a lot of nuance as to when people use which ones, but is subtyping. And it's this idea of being an exception to the rule. We're going to say, yeah, April's a woman, but she's a different kind of woman. Barack Obama, yes, he is black, but he's a different kind of black guy. And so they don't have to adjust a cognitive stereotype. You get to keep it. You get to keep all the really quick decision making that a heuristic brings you, but you just sort of acknowledge these people as exceptions to the rule, and you just throw them in their own group.
That's interesting. I've done some work on self-identity, and so your self-concept and self-schemas, and there's a similar concept in when your behavior is contrary to the self-schema that you hold in that situation. How do you handle it? And one is, do you just ignore it? There's that factor of you actually cognitively ignore that entire thing, and it doesn't even raise up to the level of anything coming in to challenge your self-concept of yourself. Or to almost the subtyping, you take it and you're looking at it from the perspective of saying, yeah, but these other situations, it was because I was overly tired, and so I didn't get very good sleep last night. That's why I didn't get up and exercise this morning. When you're looking back and you're going, yeah, but I've been overly tired for the past 5 months, and I've only, but you continually do that. Very rarely do you actually, I shouldn't say very rarely, the other then is actually, do you change that self-schema of yourself?
Yeah.
And that one is the harder component of it, right? And so, or do you change your behavior to then match it? There's actually those 4 kind of components that people do.
Yeah.
But it's interesting when you're talking about that subtyping from the outward component of looking in when that cognitive dissonance happens. So
well, when we met a month ago, I had just heard the 45 and 0 podcast, which was about 45 presidents men, 0 presidents women, and so the podcaster was interviewing congresswomen specifically, and so people these women had come up through being voted on over and over and over again, and continue to represent their districts and their states in a way that they should be tremendously proud of their efforts, but they still struggled with this being boxed in as. Is the strong woman perceived as the bitch, or is the strong woman perceived as the mother nurturer who just got lucky? The exception, the subtype kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And that was really, that's really revealing in that the women themselves, as a man, I'm not living that life, but to see that even in these tremendously successful people, that they're still struggling with this in their middle age, in the middle of their career. Do you see this kind of thing?
Hugely. And it's, and I don't want to just, for the folks who are listening to this, I don't want you to feel like this only happens to women. It does happen to women a lot, but it happens to a lot of social groups in general. I just happen to talk about this a lot because that's where my research was, and that's where I tend to focus. So just understand that there's a lot of things that apply across social groups. But, the example that you gave, take put this back again in a corporate context. If a woman is really driven and really outspoken, and in the way that she emails, she doesn't say, "Hi guys, I hope everyone's having a good day. I just wanted to ask to see if anyone else would blah, 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 words. Could you, if you just have a moment, could you please maybe check on this other da-da-da-da-da-da, words. Sincerely, words, April."
I love it's just the tone of voice that you're using in describing that. Yes.
It's exhausting. So, or what if she just wrote the email, "Hey guys, looks like we need to get this thing done. Jeff, can you take care of it? Let me know, April."
Yeah.
It's a really direct way of writing it. She's going to come off as bitchy, but it is more effective, unfortunately. So there's that crux. If she plays the nice card, you're not seen as strong enough to hold a leadership position. So you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Another example of that, I talked about the sexy woman, right? If you dress in a way that is extremely, like you're covered up, your turtleneck completely
super
covered up, whatever.
Yeah.
Look at that woman. God, can't she just relax? Oh my God. And then they'll see a woman who's on the other side. They're like, why doesn't she cover those things up? Like there's this tiny narrow range where we're straddling the two sides of, the rules. Be feminine, but not too feminine. Be a woman, but don't say that you hang out with them. You have to say like, oh, I like to hang out with guys, not women. And you have to like dress a certain way, but not too much that way. And be a certain way, but not too much that way.
It's hard.
And that's across the board with social groups. Again, one of the downsides to having these notions of what the rules are or what the bullets underneath those stereotypes are is that we set up these expectations that are so difficult to live up to and are exhausting cognitively to try to manage on a day-to-day basis.
And when those expectations are broken, right? So on either of those ends of the spectrums, how do people respond? So in an organizational setting, like you were talking about, so let's go from the clothing component, right? So whether it be they cover up fully or they're just in that provocative component in how they dress, is there a backlash that happens from an organizational perspective? Even maybe not an organizational, just from a interaction component.
Hugely so. I mean, it can be anything from something as small as, conversations being cut short or people sort of doing a little bit of the avoidance or whatever, down to I used to work in a normal, large corporate setting. And I remember being in a leadership meeting talking about one of my members of one of my teams saying, I really think this person deserves, a promotion, blah, 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 like really advocating hard for this person. And they said, well, she comes off pretty harsh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Where that would have been a entirely different conversation if that would have been a man.
I wish I could read you the emails that the person who said that sends on a regular basis without having any implications for it whatsoever.
And I know there's been some recent research, and I haven't looked into it. I've just seen the memes going by in regards to
memes are super helpful for psychology. They're
Exactly.
informative. They get to the point of it.
It's like, come on, here it is. I don't need to read the background. I can just take this, headline, and I can
give me
run
a cat
with it
doing
and
something funny.
Believe whatever it says. But they were talking about they were having people draw leaders, and when people drew leaders, the vast majority of them were male. I mean, that was regardless of age, regardless of even gender. When you were asked to draw a leader, when somebody drew a leader, most times it was a male component within that leadership. And or
the old Kahneman and Tversky story of the how do we find out who this person is? A child was brought into an emergency room, and the doctor that came in to see the child was the parent. And so they lead this conversation, and then they immediately say, well, what did he do? What did the doctor do? It's like, no. Actually, the doctor was a woman. Mm-hmm. It was her son that was coming in. Some 90+% of people went to he and not to she in that situation. Mm-hmm. And you go, wow, these are really deep. These stereotypes seem really deeply seated. Is this just how much of this is social? How much of this is environmental within a culture? Say, if we compared to Asian cultures to Western cultures, or if we compared South America to North America, April, what are there's stark differences between these, or not so much?
There's differences to the degree that those social groups are seen differently. So largely across the globe, hierarchically, women are not at the top. Now, it varies how far down that chain they are, but it does definitely mimic the education that your brain gets as you're growing up within your culture. And I kind of want to address, we're talking about this, pretty openly here. I want to address the person who's inevitably listening to this and who's kind of a naysayer saying, yeah, but this is a really nuanced situation, but women don't speak up, but women don't ask for this, but women don't whatever, but men don't mean to, but I'm not a bad person.
It's
but
just locker room
all
talk.
the buts. I know. He's everywhere. But, and I don't want to discount the fact that certain behavioral things may happen. There are behavioral differences. There are, a lot of, you're absolutely right. This is a very nuanced impact, or a very nuanced topic. But what I'm saying is one of those important facets to understand is the fact that our brain is wired to learn information. That's why my kid, who is 2.5, 4 months ago could say, maybe 100 words. And today we're like, everything that comes out of her mouth is the first time she's ever said that. This is crazy. This is why our brains are incredibly good at associations and learning. And that's all that's happening. You are not a bad person if you have stereotypes. It means you just grew up with an adaptive brain. And I would encourage you to just think about this as one facet in a very complex topic. You can actually go online and test yourself. If you Google implicit associations test, you can actually go online, pick your poison. You want to pick religious groups? Great, pick them. You want to pick, a racial or ethnic group? Great, awesome. You want to pick gender as the thing you're going to study, and you want to really go for a mind fuck? Pick your own social group. And
really?
I score as having stereotypes against women. Right. I'm a woman and I study this. It just means I have an adaptive brain and I grew up in society. That's what it means. But what happens from there, and the degree to which we accept that and just take responsibility for, it's not my fault. I didn't ask to be here. I didn't do this to myself, but you are responsible for what happens from this point forward. And so we can be adults and not point fingers and place blame, but also try to rectify a situation and do better.
So what can we do? What are some ways, either on an individual level or an organizational level, to combat some of the more negative aspects of this? Because again, our brains do this for a reason, right? It's the heuristics, easy, so we're not having to process every single time that we see somebody, but how do we combat the negative components of that?
Yeah, so I'll say two pieces. One is definitely awareness. I feel like now that we've had a lot of the news that has come out about, police shootings at traffic stops, I can send you studies from a decade and a half ago where literally they were studying this exact thing, like this scenario. Our stereotypes work in overdrive when we're stressed and we can't cognitively process and we have to make a decision fast.
Yes.
Is that a cell phone or a gun in that person's hand? Are you going to shoot or not shoot? That was literally the study. And Black people got shot more often. That officer did not ask for those stereotypes, but they do have them, and they have implications.
They're people.
So be aware that of the fact that these things are happening. Go to the IAT website and test yourself, and just know that this is the case. So step one, I would definitely say awareness is a big deal, and continuing to talk about the fact that these are things that operate below our level of consciousness. We don't know they're happening, and it doesn't make you a bad person, but you do have to do something about it. The second thing I would say is there's been some pushes. So let's go to pay disparity. There's been some pushes to not ask people what their prior salary was, or submit people's job applications or their letters of recommendation or whatever it happens to be. No photos, no names, no gender identifying or racial, ethnic identifying information attached. Because there you're not subject to things like the shifting standards phenomenon, where you have one person who has a lot of experience and one person who has a PhD, and depending upon which one you alter to be the woman in the experiment, the person will say, well, but that person didn't really have any practical experience. Well, yeah, it's great to have practical experience, but we really need somebody with a higher degree. I mean, you're not a bad person. You're not intentionally trying to harm anyone. It's just this reptilian part of your brain that was just, evolved to keep you alive, doing his thing. Yeah. And so as much as we can just keep it in check, I think that's the best route to go. And that's where you see, legislation and rules and looking at proportions of people at certain, levels of companies and that type of thing in an attempt to do that. I just think we can do it in an informational way where we just mask some of that priming information from ourselves.
So there was an orchestra, and I can't remember if it was the Philadelphia or New York orchestra, where they ended up shifting how they interviewed people for the component, and they basically hid the person performing. So they put them behind curtains, and the
voice. It's like the voice with Christina Aguilera.
It's actually, which is pretty interesting.
And the result of that was that many more women got into the orchestra based on their performance.
Sheer performance.
Because it wasn't primed that, and again, to that component of, it was some subconscious component that was lending itself to, when they were doing these interviews, that, that man has more finesse and whatever it is. I don't know anything about orchestra. You're the musician in here. But that component. And so in that blinding of that component, it was had a drastic impact on the result. And so what I'm hearing you say is, if we can stop some of those priming components in these situations, that can be a way of rectifying some of the negative aspects that are coming into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And it's about being intentional ahead of time and thinking about what are the criteria of the type of person who would be the best fit for this for this position, thinking about that before you're bombarded with job applications and background materials on people. Think, it's more of a strategic, intentional decision-making process ahead of time. And that's the whole thing, right? We either operate system 1, system 2. We operate heuristically or we operate thoughtfully and intentionally. And you're just kind of pushing yourself in the direction when you're making these really key decisions. You're pushing yourself in the direction of being more thoughtful and intentional. Now you're still going to make snap judgments. You're going to walk down the street and you're going to see someone when there's no chips at stake, when nothing really matters. You may or may not make eye contact with that person based on what they look like. Those things are likely still to happen. But in these situations where, someone's livelihood is on the line, someone's life is on the line, we should be really thoughtful and intentional about how we set ourselves up to do better.
So it's okay when the hiring manager says, my team is not diverse enough. Basically, if the hiring manager says, we've got a team of 10 people and 9 are white guys between 35 and 45, actually, we need to change things up. It's okay.
So let's get a 50-year-old white guy. Right. 51. I just had a birthday. 51-year-old white guy. Here we go. And bald, because that would diversify.
But that's okay, right? To be thoughtful and intentional about saying we want to have someone who is not a 35 to 45-year-old white guy on the team, right?
And what I encourage people to think about with that, again, I'm going to talk directly to the naysayer who's like, well, you're just excluding a whole group of people. Isn't that just excluding, like you're picking one group that you excluded before and now you're excluding another one?
Yeah.
It's more about your awareness. You're looking around your team and saying, ooh, we got like a big old sausage party going on here in data science. Hi, I go to it often. And it's very male dominated. Uh-huh. So you're just recognizing and becoming aware of that fact. You are not necessarily, there are bad people out there. There are bad people who have really bad attitudes toward people. Let's set them aside and just assume positive intent. You're likely not sitting around thinking, wow, how can I exclude all those chicks and all those people who aren't white from my team? You're not intentionally doing that. So in that respect, I don't want to assign blame or assign fault. It's more just be aware and set yourself up to make a better decision. The next time you hire, if you mask all that information, you may end up with a 40-year-old white dude. Yeah. He might objectively have been, given that one situation and that one group of applications, he might have been the best option. Or you might see what happened in the example that you gave. Over multiple hiring rounds, all of a sudden things start to shift. And it's like, damn, this actually was happening.
Yeah.
So, April, what do you think about, or do you have any thoughts on implicit bias training? I'm going to the Starbucks. So when this is going on, not too long ago, Starbucks had called in a black patron who was waiting for some friends to come in the police came. Two, and they were arrested. And so now Starbucks is taking an entire day off and closing down their stores for a morning or an afternoon and doing implicit bias training. And just want to know your thoughts on whether or not you think that's impactful, effective, because I've heard contrary perspectives on it.
I think it helps depending upon what they're planning on doing. Okay. I don't know what they're planning on doing, but I think it's helpful on the awareness front. Implicit bias is something that is thrown around a lot these days. Like I said, because there's these examples coming up in the news, social media and the fact that we walk around carrying a video camera at all times helps bring these things, to be we're more cognizant of it now. We're labeling what's happening now. I think it is important for well-informed people who actually know what implicit bias is and can give a good overview of what it is. I think that's important for people to understand it. It's more nuanced about how you apply it, though. It's not going to be, a situation where all of a sudden you're going to erase, if you have a 25-year-old barista working at I almost said Star Wars.
Hello.
Can anyone do a Chewbacca impression really quick? Working at Star Wars. The Millennial Falcon. Millennium. Jesus.
The Millennium Falcon. Yeah, the Millennial Falcon.
The millennials.
I feel like I feel like
barista
oh my
Millennial
God.
Fulcrum.
Oh my God. Anyway, so you have somebody who's 25 years old who has 25 years of training to cement those stereotypes. It's really difficult to reverse those immediately. It takes a lot of intentioned effort. It's not going to happen in an afternoon.
Well, and you even said you work in this, and you took you looked
IAT.
at your own group and different things. And I
got 'em.
know, being a behavioral scientist and knowing the components of social proof and different things, and I know that I shouldn't be swayed by some of that component, but I still know that I do. I am. I mean, I am not above because I'm aware of things. Confirmation bias is constant, right? I am continually realizing that I'm going to something and I'm going, oh yeah, I believe that. And then it's like, wait, why am I believing that when I haven't even looked into it any further? So
You talk about looking at your own, taking the test and sort of looking at your own situation as the ultimate mindfuck. Was it for you? Did you have this no way kind of experience when you took it, or were you already pretty self-aware that you were going to have your own biases in these areas, et cetera?
Yeah. The first time I took it, I was in graduate school learning about this for the first time. It was crazy.
Yeah?
It was insane to think about.
Did you feel parts of your mind just exploding?
Yes, and then I felt incredibly guilty. Like, what am I doing to other women, and how might this have been affecting me? And oh my God. And then you start to think about the implications for, other social groups, and, like, if a Muslim person grows up in the United States and starts to form that stereotype about their own group, that there's terrorism and violence and all of this stuff, and then the gender that, is associated with that stereotype, like the gender implications for it, what that does to your self-identity, I'm like, damn, no wonder why we behave in the way that we do. No wonder why people's identity, like we talk a lot about, in sort of the more broad self-helpy sort of literature, talks about like self-limiting beliefs and things like that. No wonder why that's a thing, and they came from somewhere. Yeah. And so it's amazing, to think through all of those pieces, but it started, and that's why I said awareness is a big deal. It started by me taking that test and kind of eating my own dog food and getting a dose of my own medicine and being like, yeah, 100% of us are going to score in not a very favorable direction on most of those tests.
To some degree.
To some degree. Yeah.
Okay, this is fun. I'd like to just change over because you're launching Peak Mind Psychology.
Yes.
And if it's okay with you, Kurt, could we talk a little bit about Peak Mind Psychology? You could just say, no, screw you. What the hell are you doing?
We're still going to go there. So let's just go there.
No, but it's positioned in a way so that Kurt really doesn't have any power to overturn it. But I want to act like I'm giving him the power to overturn it, even though he doesn't have the power to overturn it.
All the important tools and technology are sitting in front of you. So
yes, Tim has control.
I have control.
So if you ever wonder why this turns out horribly or great, we'll all lay it on you.
Oh, snap. Tell us about Peak Mind Psychology.
So Peak Mind Psychology is the Center for Psychological Strength, and it is a venture that I'm starting with a great friend and former graduate school colleague of mine, Ashley Smith. She is an extremely talented clinical psychologist in the field of anxiety. And, we've talked a lot in this episode about cognitive associations. I almost feel like the majority of psychology, upwards of 85%, has this in common that, guess what? Our brains are adaptive. Mm-hmm. They learn and they form associations. And therefore, this other stuff happens. Yeah. And so to change what happens, we have to change those things. So she and I got to talking about that, and we got to talking about how there are amazing tools, applied tools, not applied in the sense of policy and making big societal changes and whatever. That's important. But applied tools in the sense that people, individuals, can use them in their daily lives and live a better life, experience life better. because they are, we talk about peak mind. Like, they have developed some of these techniques and this mindset that allows them to just move through life a little bit better. So we're basically bringing all of the amazing research and all of the amazing tools that Ashley has been doing in her therapy sessions, cognitive behavioral therapy and friends that are very similar in some ways and different in some ways, from that core technique, a bunch of stuff from cognitive psychology, a bunch of stuff from positive psychology. We're bringing the best stuff that has been shown to work, and we're bringing it out there to the 80% of people who, don't necessarily have a mental health diagnosis. And the goal is to take a wellness approach to mental health. It's not to just rid you of having a diagnosis, but it's to get you much further than that and help you start to thrive and succeed and live better.
That's very
because
cool.
There's so much power in this, and I just don't see it happening in the field as much.
Yeah. It's an interesting, if you look at psychology's history, positive psychology wasn't even around.
It's like 15 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this
stuff is really new.
The vast history of history. Did I just say that really weird?
I called it the Millennial Falcon.
Oh my God. His story? I don't know. Anyway, maybe
his
there's
story.
Yeah. The vast history of psychology is all looking at people who are messed up. Not messed up is the wrong way. That have some clinical, diagnosis that you're looking to solve for an answer. Not to say, as everyday people, that we can be better and actually live a fuller, more wonderful, thriving life. And I think that's a great piece. And so I'm applauding that, because that's I will definitely be using that.
Oh, and we are so adaptive.
We are.
I love that. That's for me, that's like the big hope. That's the big star, out in the sky every night for me, is that we can adapt. We're not a bunch of code that has been written. We're not a pie that's been baked and it's done.
Well, and this is interesting.
Right? We continue to evolve.
There's the thing when we talked about hardwired, right, in different pieces, and so there's a part of us that is hardwired, but that hardwire has a software layer on top of it, and that software can be changed, and that's the part where that drives a lot of what we do. And sometimes I think we get stuck. It gets into that fixed mindset or growth mindset components and various different.
I'm literally.
Are you reading Carol
Dweck's
book?
Carol Dweck. There we go.
Okay. Let's just make a pitch for Carol Dweck here, because
she's amazing.
She is amazing, and it's not just. There's a lot about that book that is about education, but that is a tremendously powerful book.
It is,
and so
hugely so.
Yeah,
and so. I'm going to go one direction, and then I think we need to come back to some books components. But in addition to peak mind psychology, you founded a company called Sprocket.
I did.
And I would like to hear a little bit about that, but I really want to hear about digital exhaust analysis, because the name sounds freaking fantastic.
That is the shit. That is absolutely the shit. Digital exhaust analysis. Yeah.
I love it.
Help us understand a little bit about Sprocket, and then you got to dig into digital exhaust analysis.
Sure. Okay, so Sprocket Customer Experience, or Sprocket CX, was founded by 3 people. So myself, I head up the data science arm of the company.
Good.
A man named Justin Royer. You can look for his podcast. I believe he's on iTunes and other places, Working with Purpose. You can find him there.
This is the big pitch today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. I'm like plugging my friends and all the people. I'm like, what else? Nobody's paying me to do this, by the way. He is our experience designer. He has an incredible design thinking and customer experience background. And then Trace Tronvold has an amazing background in finance and economics. I call him the financy pants, leg of the company.
He's not the Millennial Falcon.
No, he's not. He's not Chewbacca either. So the 3 of us got together. We joke that the joke is a data scientist, a designer, and a finance guy walked into a bar, because that's literally what happened. And we realized that we could solve customer experience problems by bringing beautiful design and innovation to it and powering it with data science. So one of the things we do for companies is this digital exhaust analysis, where, it's one thing to send a survey out and ask people, what'd you think of your iPhone? And, tell me about whatever. And, Apple is sponsoring this survey. And so you kind of answer and whatever. It's another thing to get them in their native environment when they're all motivated to talk to you. And that is customer reviews and customer experience phone calls that have been transcribed. All of this text, this exhaust that's left out in cyberspace. We scrape it and mine it and send it through the machines, and we figure out what kind of sentiment was going on when that these people left positive reviews or negative reviews about this company. And the cool thing is we can do that for your competitors too. So they don't even know what's happening, and we can scrape a company's reviews and we can scrape a handful of their competitors and figure out, oh, that's adorable that you think your brand is saying this thing to people. What they're actually saying is this stuff over here, and here's what they're saying about other people who are in your same space.
Yeah.
So it really gives people great insight and gives our clients great insight into what their customers are saying behind their backs when they're not prompted, via a survey or some of these other artificial ways that are helpful, but
or even when it is on the public record and those companies are sort of ignoring it, right? They're using their lenses of confirmation bias to just look for the things that say, oh, we must be doing great.
Well, and it's been hard in the past. Like, how do you mine through 20,000 customer reviews that are text and just blah, blah, on a website? How do you do that? How do you go through thousands of customer service phone calls? Like, you might, best case, you have a CRM where you check boxes that say, okay, this was a complaint or this was a positive thing. Right. This had to do with like product functionality. They wanted to return it. You might be checking some boxes maybe, but that's the best that people have been able to do because it's been just technologically difficult, and we just do it for you.
You talk about some of the things that you do at Sprocket have to do with AI and learning. Machine learning. What do you think of Cass Sunstein's description of AI more as a cognitive collaborator rather than actually sort of giving the machine the intelligence moniker?
I think it's a huge deal. I mean, there's a lot of discussion right now about what the direction of AI, what direction it will likely go. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive, and there's a lot of smart people saying that there's going to be no role for humans and there's no role for, the way that our thought processes work in this collaborative nature. There's a lot of smart people saying that, and they may know more than I do. And maybe I'm just a naive optimist. Could be. But I've just seen too many times, just in the world we live in today, machine learning is an art and a science, and the art comes in with warm bodies coming up with hypotheses, warm bodies looking at situations that are happening, and then giving it to the machines to really throw gas on that fire. So there are things that people do well, and there are things that machines do well. Machines can find subtle patterns in massive amounts of data that people can't do.
We would never be able to do.
But it can only find that using the input variables that you feed in, and people today have to create those.
And the algorithms to look for them.
Yeah. So I still talk about it as sort of a semi-automated, collaborative approach. And like I said, there's really intelligent people saying, adorable, you're going to be out of a job soon. Maybe we're all just going to be like in hammocks with like our, salary that's given to us from the government, and we just hang out and nobody has a job anymore. Maybe.
Universal basic income.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe. I don't know. But I just think I see, maybe it's because I'm optimistic, but I just see such a great role for people's creative minds.
It's something we've had conversations about in the past, and it is, it's so nebulous, and the path that it could take could go so many different ways. I think it's something that, to what we talked about before, there's an awareness component that we need to be thinking about it in advance as opposed to just letting it happen. Because I think if we're purposeful and thinking about the potential downfalls and the potential upsides, that hopefully we're going to steer it to a more of an upside. I do have to say, I watched the the Google Assistant video where they called and made a hair appointment for a woman. It's freaked the hell
It's
out
amazing.
of me.
Oh, yeah, that was...
Because I'm going, the person on the other end had no clue that was a computer doing it.
It was a machine.
It was a machine. Using ums
Yeah.
and ahs and
Yes.
just the response in a very natural setting. And you could see, I mean, that's Terminator right there to a certain degree to me.
Well, and I have a colleague at the University of Alabama who is working on some Google Photo stuff, that Google Photos can go in and identify objects in photos.
Yeah.
Gun, phone,
in their native
house.
environment. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a photograph, and that there's three people. Google can identify house, beach, trees, mustache. So he said, I have one photograph from when I was 20 years old that's in my Google Photos, and it has me in a mustache. I didn't label it that way.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but I can go into Google Photos and search mustache, and that picture comes right up.
Yeah.
And yet it doesn't have the ability to differentiate between colonial and Georgian.
Yeah.
It can't differentiate between
Yet.
Well,
So far.
but that's. I mean, there's. I don't know if that's so much. Okay, I'm going to edit.
Yeah, we're going down.
Yeah.
We're
Okay.
going
Okay.
down.
Should we talk music?
Let's talk books. So we talked
books.
about it. So
Yeah,
what
yeah.
are some books that you
Yeah.
think listeners that have influenced you that you would say, gosh, go out and read this book?
Oh man. So Dweck's book, Mindset, is really wonderful. That just has a lot of applicability for how we relate to kids, how we think about ourselves, how we, really have developed the way that we approach challenge. That's a big deal. Seligman's book, Flourish, does a nice job of giving an overview of positive psychology. I'm going to grab my phone for a second because I have to tell you the audiobook that I am listening to right now. I literally just downloaded it and I'm geeking out over the woman. And I want to get it right. Her name is Tara Mohr and her book is called Playing Big. And what's cool about her, for people who sort of, jive on the stuff that I did my research on, this gender stereotyping and that type of piece, she does a phenomenal job of combining the worlds of, hey, we grew up in this society and we have these stereotypes and these sort of gender norms and that type of thing. And oh, by the way, that's why we might find ourselves in this situation where we have an inner critic who sounds a certain way and keeps us from doing big things. And so I'm like a big proponent of like lighting a fire under women's butts and getting them to go out and do these massively big goals and achieve these massively big things. And her book is phenomenal at helping you do that. And it's a very practical application. So those three, I would say.
I'm leaving here and going and buying that book because we've had conversations with a colleague about how we identify ourselves. This ended up getting very personal. About he asked me, do I identify myself as a musician? And I said no. He's like, well, you have 6 records. Yeah. You play 50, 60 times a year. Yeah. You continue to write songs. Yeah. But you're not a musician. And I said, I just don't identify that way. There's something in my brain that is prohibiting me from getting, there's like this gateway that I just can't break through. Yeah. Okay, but this is not a therapy session. Sorry.
And this is
Do you want to lay down?
Damn it, it always comes back to you.
I have all the technology and equipment in front of me. I will run the podcast.
No, you guys. Okay.
Yeah, you're the elder. All right.
Oh, God, I'm totally just eating my way into these today.
All right.
Okay, so music. We love to talk about music because this is the behavioral grooves. Mm-hmm. So how much of a music geek are you?
Hugely.
Yeah, so what music just inspires you?
Oh, man. I waffle back and forth. So I'm a big believer in using music to put you in a certain state of mind to be able to execute something.
Priming.
Right Love it.
There.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's why literally the podcast that I do, we have a Spotify playlist. And there's a reason for that because I want people to have a place to turn to get pumped up when they need it. Mm-hmm. So I have playlists that I mean, there's anything from like, it's a lot of strong women that are on there. I mean, there's anything from like Nicki Minaj to, I mean, some old No Doubt that's on there.
Wow.
I really just gravitate toward really strong women. The band Churches, like, could just die. The Mother We Share is an awesome song. I love that type of thing. But then I also like really sort of for coding or when I need to not get distracted, which is difficult for a multi-passionate person. It's hard.
I love this multi-passionate person thing.
Not a multitasker.
It's a multi-passionate type.
No, it's a positive framing of it.
Really
it makes me
It's
feel
great.
good about myself.
I know, I love it.
No, then I need something that's more of like a chill, ambient sort of house music kind of thing. Nora and Pure and that type of thing. That's just more of a calm house sort of XM chill station. Really love.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, and so you're drawn to both.
Yeah.
So this is a psychological question about music that I've been wondering about. Why is it that so many times we ask this question about songs or artists, musical artists that define our podcasts or interviewees? Why is it that so many of the answers come from their childhood? Why is it that right? You and I talk about it all the time. Now that doesn't inhibit us. I mean, your Kurt is constantly changing and updating his playlists.
Yeah, but if you ask me, I go back to my 80s.
Well, right, because that's your home, right?
That's my deal.
So
I don't know. Maybe
do you
there's
think,
like
Doc?
a critical period or something. You know, there's like a critical period for language and whatever. Maybe there's some identity development critical period. We need a developmental psychologist. We got to call my friend Meredith or something. But
there we go.
She's next, I guess.
Yeah, Meredith McGinley, get on the podcast.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe there's some kind of critical period where we just kind of imprint like little baby birds or something. Totally guessing.
So, April, you talked a little bit about your podcast. Tell our listeners about your podcast. How can they go out and listen to it, and how could they get in touch with you?
Yeah, everything that I do that is non-Sprocket related is on aprilseifert.com, and you can find the podcast there. Podcast is Women Inspired. Like I said, I'm super passionate about lighting a fire under women's butts and convincing them they absolutely have more power, absolutely have more ability and more control than they think they have. You can craft a better and more exciting and more dynamic life than what you've got going on right now, if that's something that you want to do. And I'm bringing interviews of women who have done just that to share their entire story, good, bad, ugly, lessons, all of it, to help give you examples of women who have done, you name it, I've interviewed them. So you need an example of somebody who's kicking ass in one domain, I've got her for you. I've probably got a handful of them for you. So would love, and I mean, there's some men that listen to it too, and they've reached out to me and said, these are universal things you're talking about. But I just tend to focus on a women's audience because that's my jam. But
Awesome. Well, April, thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our Behavioral Grooves interview, have a free-flowing discussion on some of those topics, and whatever else comes into our big round thing that's on top of our shoulders. All right, there we go. So, Tim, impressions from our session with April. What caught your fancy?
Well, energy. How about that for number one? Did you happen to pick up on her energy?
She had a little bit of energy. It was fantastic, and it was just filled the room.
She could power Las Vegas.
She could.
Oh my gosh.
It was fantastic.
Yeah. So
and then she spoke at the Behavioral Grooves meetup that we had as well. I happened to miss that one, but
she was great. She was super. Of course, every bit of dynamism that she exhibits, on the podcast,
she's a full 7-8 months pregnant at the time. Oh my gosh. So beyond the energy and beyond the just joy of having her in the room with us, what else from the topics that we talked about?
Implicit association bias.
Tell me, what about implicit association bias captured your attention?
Well, I didn't get turned on to this until a few years ago, and the Harvard work had been going on for some time. And I thought, oh, me, I don't have any implicit bias.
Oh, of course not.
I've totally overcome
Tim
all
Houlihan.
that. Yeah, I'm way beyond that. And ding, guess what? I took the test and found out that I have some implicit biases.
Wow.
Yeah, big shock, right? So that really hit me. So when we were talking about it with April, what was going on in my mind was, it's not if we have them. It's not if anyone who's listening. We all have them.
Right.
It's how much and to what degree, and then, as April reinforces, what do you do about it?
Right. And I think that is the important thing from my perspective, is understanding that, yes, we all have them. We have them to different degrees. But if we want to do something about it, what is it that we can do? And so what did you take away from that?
I heard three things that I thought were really good. And I think this is based on her work, on April's work. First of all is be aware. Right, because it's a bias, we're not aware. Right. So, like taking the test was going out to that site actually helped me just become aware of the biases that I have.
Yeah, and you can again Google just implicit bias test, and you can get a number of them. They're
Tons.
free.
Yep.
They're wonderful. I started to take one before we were doing this, but I didn't finish, so I'm interested to see what my biases are.
Can't wait. I wish you would have finished. We could have talked about that. And the first thing is be aware. The second thing is talk about it.
Okay.
Right. So like this, the value of actually just saying, okay, this is how I come to the table. And I'm not always aware of I'm coming to the table with this.
Yes.
I think that enhances your relationships just by having that dialogue.
And I think sometimes in those conversations, it lends itself also to better understanding how you interact with those other people who you may have stereotypes, biases with. And so having that understanding, I think, is a really powerful tool. So.
Yeah. And then the third thing, so it's first is be aware, second is talk about it, and the third is do what you can to remove those triggers.
Yes.
Right? Because they're there, and we can become aware of them once we understand what our biases are.
Right.
So we can sort of retrace our steps, right?
And that lends itself into one of the things that I found really exciting about this conversation is a number of the topics kept coming back to priming. And we talked about being primed in certain things and having this cognitive association that happens, was what she was talking about from the component of stereotype, which is basically priming, which is an area that I just find fascinating. Yeah. So again, those triggers that you talked about are primes. They are things that at a subconscious level within our brain not help us, but make our cognitive thought processes go down one road versus another road.
Right, because those associations are somewhat automatic, right?
They are automatic from a component. And they are at a point that we don't necessarily understand them. It goes back to a lot of Cialdini's work that we've talked about on the podcast before. Just in, being in front of a flower shop, you're more likely to, give your phone number to somebody from the opposite sex.
So some of it's DNA, but some of it is environmental, right?
Exactly.
How we grew up.
Yes.
The world in which we grow up in makes a difference.
Yeah.
I found that particularly interesting too. It also reminds me of Jonathan Haidt's work.
Yeah.
I've referenced his work in the past, the Happiness Project, and of course my favorite is the self-control. No, let's give it self-control for the righteous. The Righteous Mind.
Yes.
Yeah, John Haidt's work on the Righteous Mind, where he talks about we're not born with a blank slate. We have DNA that we're coming into the world with. However, that DNA gets shaped and formed by the environment. Right. And so those implicit biases can be shaped and honed and strengthened or weakened by the environment that we grow up in. And so today as adults, trying to be an adult, I get to have the opportunity to be aware and to talk about it, and then actually look for those triggers and remove them.
Yeah, and I think it's a great aspect that as adults, hopefully, we all go out and try to limit the number of negative stereotypes and biases that we have, and just going out and doing that. Another piece that April brought up that I thought was really interesting is she brought up this whole component about, kind of in passing almost, of naysayers, of those people who look at this work and just say, well, that's not me, or it's something else. It goes into a number of things. We had a conversation prior to this about a friend of ours who has a major kind of blind spot in regards to all the bad things that happen to him are something else's fault.
External forces.
External forces. The world is conspiring against him.
But everything good
is my own personal effort and
hard work, grit, determination, and creativity.
All of that. And I think that sometimes we all fall into that trap. And
definitely,
the naysayers can be a component. It doesn't have to be about stereotype. It doesn't have to be about any of this, but we often have those blind spots within ourselves. And so that was something that I thought was interesting for me, is to think about that, to think about, well, what are some of the things that I strongly believe in and have a conviction that I talk about, that there's probably a number of people that are sitting there shaking their head and going, nah, that's not how it works, or different pieces of it.
And how much of that is real cognitive disagreement based on some deep thinking? We talked about, April talked to us about System 1, System 2 thinking.
Yeah.
How much of that is that clear, deep, analytical thinking that says, no, that really isn't right, or that doesn't really jive with either the science or my experience? And how much is just System 1 going, nope, I'm going to write that off.
Immediate. Yep. Here we go. Doesn't come into what my prior experience was, and so therefore it doesn't fit, and we don't have that confirmation bias that clicks in, or we do have confirmation in the client that clicks in.
So as someone that really doesn't do that much, Kurt, how do you feel about people who do?
Oh, my immediate response is they're just idiots. I think it's hard. I think, again, you look at the world in which we live, and it's easier to be a naysayer often than it is to take that hard cognitive look into the reality of the situation. Mm-hmm. We fall back on that System 1 immediate response. What was it? Cal... why am I drawing a blank?
The author of Reddit. Yeah. Cal Turnbull.
Cal Turnbull said about, that first response that we have is typically not the best response, yet it's the one that we tend to build our walls around and we hold on to for dear life. There is something about that I think happens very often, particularly when it comes to emotional things, politics, religion, sex, those types of aspects. And I think it would be of great benefit if we could take a step back and be more rational about it. However, I don't hold out hope.
Well, it's just not in our nature.
No.
There's a great article in Bloomberg recently about how people moved away from towns because the small towns that are dying because of the lack of jobs, and some people are moving back. And so they did an in-depth analysis of the people who are moving back, and some of them are moving back for that System 1 thinking. It's just, this is where I grew up. I'm not going to live anywhere else.
Right.
Which is pretty simplistic, quick response stuff.
Right.
But some people said, if the town's going to survive, I have to move back. I have to show some demonstration, and I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to make a contribution to that. And I thought that was really interesting that some of the townspeople have that visceral response, and some of them are taking a very calculated and thoughtful approach to doing something that is extremely difficult, to move back to a small town that is very much on the death toll.
Do you want to talk about music?
Yeah, because that was getting to be kind of a downer.
Well, I know before we started recording, we were talking about music, and you mentioned an artist and a song that you wanted to talk about, and I was excited because I actually knew of it, which isn't always the case when you start talking about the people that you're talking about. And so it was Jason Isbell, and the song was "If We Were Vampires."
Yeah, I've been a fan of Jason since he was with Drive-By Truckers.
Okay,
I think his song "Goddamn Lonely Heart" is just magnificent in its simplicity and straightforwardness.
Okay.
And if you're not familiar with Drive-By Truckers, I encourage you to check them out and check out the track "Goddamn Lonely Heart" because it's just it again, he just boils down this very, very, big issue to the very, very simple messaging. And he did that again with "If We Were Vampires."
But he does it in a very interesting way with this song. And so tell the listeners, if they haven't heard this, the premise of the song, kind of the overarching analogy or...
So the song is about, if we were vampires, we wouldn't have to worry about time. And yet it's the constraints of time that actually enhances our relationship. It's what draws me to want to hold your hand. He's speaking as the lover, right? And he's talking to his lover, and he says, it's because of this time, this limitation on time, that I want to hold your hand.
That I know I won't have eternity to spend with you, so I have to make every moment become more precious.
Yeah, and
every moment becomes more precious.
The imagery is gorgeous.
Yes.
The nails as the watermark of your love. It's like, oh man, and she's just a tremendous songwriter. But he delivers. Jason is a great songwriter, not just because of clever lyrics, but because he delivers really great songs. So.
Right. Well, it's a fantastic song, and we are talking about temporal construal and time and all of those factors that go into it. It's the nerdy side of us talking about bringing behavioral science and music together. But I think I would welcome anybody out there to go and listen to the song, search for it on your Google machine or whatever it is that you get music on. And with that, give us a good rating if you like this. If you want to hear more about a topic or anything, send us a note. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you very much.